Hello there, friends, and welcome back to Sesh Cast. My name is Goldilocks. This is Sesh Cast, a cannabis podcast for cannabis sessions, and today's going to be a little bit different. Today is actually an interview with a cannabis photographer and influencer that I met through Instagram named Tweedledoob. Now, full disclosure, the audio for parts of this interview are not the best. Unfortunately, my setup is a little jank and a little cheap. And after two not so great interview experiences, well, I shouldn't say bad interview experience, but bad interview audio experiences, I am 110% investing in a better way to record interviews. But this interview was really, really great. I had an awesome, amazing time chatting with Tweedledoob for a little while. And I really wanted to get the audio out there. So, like I said, some of the audio is not the best, but for your reading pleasure, I posted an entire transcript of this interview in the show notes for this episode. So, depending on what you're listening to this on, those show notes may be a little difficult to find. I don't know necessarily where they're at on every podcast app, but the one thing I can say is that my website will be the easiest place to find find those show notes. So that is seshcast.libsyn.com. The show notes will be posted right under today's episode, so you can check those out whenever you want. If you're listening back to this and think to yourself, I have no idea what in the world was just said, that is not you or your phone or your laptop or whatever you are listening to your podcast on. That is my fault. My audio sucks. So, again, the biggest shout out and thank you in the entire world to Tweedledoob for spending some time and sitting down with me. It was a really awesome interview. I'm super excited for you guys to hear it, and that is coming your way in just a moment. But I do want to say, if you want to find more about Tweedledoob, you can find her on Instagram at Tweedledoob, TweedleDoob, as well as on the interwebs at tweedledoob.com. So all of that will be posted in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy the interview, and I will check back in with you after we talk for a little while. Cheers. All right, guys, so welcome back to Sesh Cast. My name is Goldilocks, and today I am sitting down with someone you may know from Instagram. You may just know from the general cannabis-related internet, Tweedledoob. How are you?
I'm awesome, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for taking some time to sit down with me. I really appreciate it. For anyone who may not have heard of you before or doesn't really know who you are, can you give me a brief rundown on what you're about and how you gained traction in the cannabis community?
For sure. So, mostly I do cannabis photography and like social media promotion kind of stuff. I've had my Instagram going for just over 3 years now. I started it when I was working at a cannabis lounge during university. So in Toronto, there's these amazing places you can go. You just bring your own weed, pay $5, and just hang out basically. So I kind of like supervised stoners for like 4.5 years. And that kind of really got me into the industry and helped me make a lot of connections and kind of figure out that, like, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but the cannabis space is definitely, like, the place for me. So it kind of gave me some direction. And then my Instagram, I just kind of started it off for fun. I never expected that it would turn into, like, my full-time gig. But, yeah, it's pretty crazy.
So, you said a couple words that I'm based out of America, and that I think a lot of people also based out of America may have no earthly idea what you just said. So, a cannabis lounge, that's something cool that we definitely don't have a lot of here. Can you explain a little bit more about what it was like to babysit stoners for 4 years?
For sure. It was amazing. It's a really fascinating place. Like, I think people have this idea of, like, who stoners are. But when you open up a space like that, you see that it's pretty hard to define. So, like, everybody from 18 to literally 80, if you don't have a place to consume cannabis at home or people don't know that you consume cannabis or whatever the case may be. It's kind of just a safe space where you can go and just use your cannabis. So it's in Toronto here currently. It's actually not fully legal or regulated, but there have been lounges in the city for about 20 years now. So it's it's when you walk in, they all kind of have their own vibe, but it's essentially like a cafe or kind of bar kind of feeling. But there's no alcohol, no tobacco, just cannabis.
Man, that's super cool. So how many of those would you say there are in Toronto? Like, how popular is that?
Right now, I think there are 5 of them in the city. There have been other ones over the years that have kind of come and gone, but I think there's 5 right now.
Cool, very cool. Looks like you got a joint rolled up, so I have one too. I'm going to take a second to spark up. So yeah, we'll put it on pause for a second. Cheers.
That's it.
And you were smoking on something I had never heard of. What was that?
It's called Honey Rock. I've never heard of it either, to be honest. This is my first puff. We're just testing it out.
Yeah.
So far, it's on.
Cool.
What are you smoking?
I have, I think, the very end of my Granddaddy Purple.
Very nice.
Yeah, I just picked up yesterday, and I got Gorilla Glue 4 and Jack Herrera. So this is the end of my last buy from like almost a month ago when I stocked up for 420. So,
nice. Oh.
Yeah. So the other thing that you said that I think is very foreign to anybody here in America is just the use of the word university. For anybody who doesn't know, that's going to college, because that's not a phrase that we use here in America. But one thing that I think is really interesting is that on your Instagram bio, you have your majors from your college experience, which means it must have been somewhat important to you and is still somewhat important to you. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
For sure. Interesting question. Yeah, it is. I think it's kind of an easy way to just tell a little bit about myself. In the bio, I feel like people coming to your page don't really, we make judgments so quickly, right? On Instagram, it's like, you go to somebody's new page, you're like 5 seconds later, nope, not for me, right? So I thought kind of putting that in my bio tells a little bit more about me that you might not get from my first few pictures or whatever you might see. And if people are interested in philosophy or in Buddhist philosophy, they might like take another second to kind of stick around. I also think it's something that's kind of different. I don't think there's really not that many people studying philosophy or Buddhist philosophy these days. So, yeah, just a point of differentiation, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that philosophy is really interesting because the more that you end up as a stoner, the more into open thought and philosophizing you become. So how has your interest in philosophy and specifically Buddhist philosophy sort of carried over into your experiences in the cannabis community, or maybe meshed with, like, how has your cannabis experience meshed with the way that you have studied or experienced philosophy and Buddhist philosophy?
Okay, so to the first part of that question, while I was going to university, I was spending a lot of time studying in vapor lounges and places where people kind of just naturally end up having philosophical conversations, even though they may not have the formal academic language to talk about it. I think these things, people like get high and think about big ideas very often. So I think just spending time in those places around people that are open to having interesting conversations or talking about things they don't understand really helped me kind of like develop my thought process and the ability to kind of take an academic idea and be able to talk about it with people that don't have that same kind of formal education. But not to say that they don't have like valid opinions or ideas. It's just, philosophy and Buddhist philosophy, these ideas aren't things that we really talk about all the time in our daily lives, but I think some people are quite interested in it. So it's an interesting kind of crossover, I think.
Yeah, did you ever meet anybody at a lounge that really hit you in a way that you had never thought about something, or sort of turned something around on you that made you think you were possibly sitting down with another modern day stone philosopher?
Hmm. You know what? The first thing that came to mind, first person that popped into my head, I had a few people come in when I was working at the lounge that were, had been having conversations, philosophical type conversations with friends, and were kind of at a lost point and didn't know kind of, like, you can really think yourself into a corner sometimes in philosophy, which is why I think sometimes people tend to avoid it or tend to avoid big ideas that they don't understand. If there's no clear answer, sometimes it's better just not to think about it, right? So I've gotten into some like very interesting discussions where people are coming at it from a very personal place and kind of just trying to work through ideas or concepts, and it's definitely changed my perspective on some things where you can have, kind of, what you read in a book, but when somebody challenges you with their own ideas, you have to really be able to like work through a problem and not just go by what the book says. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Personal philosophical conversations with people at lounges, which I think is like one of my favorite things.
That's awesome. Is that something that still happens now, even though you don't work at a lounge?
Maybe not so much, but I get some interesting DMs, I'll tell you.
Really?
I mean, of all sorts. Not too many philosophical conversations, not regularly, but people definitely, I don't know what it is, but people will message me about their personal problems or their like big questions they have in their lives if they're feeling lost or whatever. Sometimes I don't know what it is, but people, I guess, feel like they can relate to me or feel like I might have some kind of perspective on their whatever issue they're having. So I do get into like intense conversations with strangers in my DMs now.
Interesting. That's super cool. And I think that kind of bleeds back into the way you have become a cannabis influencer on Instagram. And how I was reading your blog a little bit earlier. If anyone is interested in following up a little bit more with Tweedledoob, you can find a lot more stuff at tweedledoob.com off of Instagram. But I was reading through your blog a little bit earlier, and one of the things I saw that you talked about was going from just being in the cannabis space and a cannabis photographer to actually starting your Instagram, to actually putting yourself on your Instagram as a person, as opposed to just your photography and your content from the cannabis space. So how has the transition been for anyone who is listening, who is interested in being a digital influencer of some sort, or just wants to know a little bit more about what it's like to be a digital influencer, a digital content creator? How have you sort of swung your life, and what sort of changes have you come into and experiences have you come into by becoming a digital influencer with a face and a persona online, as opposed to just a handle and some photos?
Yeah, great question. It's been, I guess, about 2 years now since I started putting more of myself online. And it was a big deal kind of for me. For the first year that I had Instagram, I felt super weird about it. And I felt like, I'm not Tweedledoob. Like, Tweedledoob is like my Instagram account of just my photos. And I was really hesitant to put more of myself out there for a variety of reasons. And really, the content creation and like influencer thing didn't really come until I had really started to put myself out there more. And I think part of the reason why is because like we have this kind of way of looking at people's accounts. I think like as accounts, we don't think of them as real people a lot of the time. If you don't know what somebody looks like, but you love their photography, you have a certain appreciation for it, but you think of it like an account, right? But that's like somebody that just like wakes up and eats and sleeps and does all these other human things, right? So I think my kind of traction really started to come when I was putting more of my life on there. And so part of that, I think, was working at the lounge at the time. And so I had a pretty unique day-to-day experience, even though it was my kind of like 9 to 5. I was just like going to work and smoking weed. And I think that kind of like fascinated a certain group of people. But I think what the main thing that's kind of given me the most amount of traction and that came from putting myself out there is like the connections with other people, other influencers, other people in the cannabis space, other photographers, where you can learn more skills or whatever. You can really connect with people like human to human when you're actually putting yourself online, putting more of your personality. And I think a huge part of that is video as well. Videos, I think, really change the way we kind of interact with other people online. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really interesting. Like you become in such an interesting situation when you start to put yourself online as opposed to just your content, to a point where you become your own content. And I think that once you hit that point of becoming your own content, it's a really interesting ship to navigate, or excuse me, a really interesting like sea to navigate, of how much of myself do I put online, what sort of online persona do I have, who have I become to people that they want me to keep up with.
Yeah, that part I'm not so into that. For me, the stuff that I put out, I have to feel totally comfortable putting video out or putting content out that I know this like wide variety of people will see. So like all of my family and my boyfriend's family will see it, including like grandparents, right? All the way down to like friends and strangers, and like 50% of my audience is like outside North America. So like people that don't even speak the same language as me. So if I tried to like cater to these certain groups, I think it would get really like confusing and overwhelming. And so I just have to like be myself enough and like feel comfortable and confident to just like 100% be me. So like all those groups of people, like I'm okay with them seeing it because it's me. It's not like I'm trying to be this one thing for somebody or trying to like get likes from this one certain group. Like I just have to like be me, and that's the only way I can like really be comfortable doing videos or like putting myself out there.
And that's such a cool way to look at things, and I think, almost an old school way of being a content creator. I know that we're of an age where the birth of YouTube is something that I remember very well. I don't know how interested in like YouTube or anything you are, but I remember when YouTube went from just a place that there were videos on the internet to something you could make as a career.
Totally.
And back at the very beginning, it seemed like people were just putting things out that they wanted to put out. And today it seems so analytically based and so fit into the algorithm. And that's true with Instagram as well. You know, like, how can I do everything I can to make sure that most people see what I want to see? And it almost warps your content into something that you don't really want to create. So I think it's really interesting and super commendable to hear someone say, like, I want to put out stuff that I'm super comfortable with and something that isn't catered to get clicks from a certain group of people. So that's really cool, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the it's a great question, really interesting. Kind of got me thinking too, and like it's kind of it's taken like a lot to come to that. Really, like I wouldn't have been able to give you that answer a year ago, or it's this whole thing is like so quickly evolving, and like even just the Instagram, like the algorithm change in earlier this year has totally changed the way that I'm using Instagram and like the features and how I'm using them, and it's just this constantly evolving thing. So yeah, it kind of makes it interesting or like kind of challenging to navigate. But yeah, that said, I think in one way, I almost had to go back on something that I said when I was thinking about when you were talking. I can't say that I 100% don't think of like what people want to see or don't try to like. I do have this like, there's kind of a separation between like the things that I post about my life and about myself, and like I am still creating content for myself and for other people. And when in creating content, it's more curated. Like, I don't know if you know Gary Vee.
The name is very familiar, but could you tell me who it is?
Yeah, oh my God, he's kind of hard to describe. He's like a business mogul, but he's kind of like really gotten popular over the last 3 years through his like social media stuff. And he gives a lot of like business advice. He's kind of like a motivational speaker-ish. He's got a podcast. He's kind of everywhere right now. But one of the things that he was talking about over the last year, kind of social media wise, is kind of the difference between like creating and documenting. So a lot of people like are just on the content creation side of things, and it's like you can have a very curated account and it's very like almost clinical, like for a business or whatever. Like you see some people like that too, where they only have like super ultra posed photos of themselves and you don't really know like who that person is. It's just this image they've kind of created of themselves. And the other side of that, what Gary Vee was like, he talked a lot about like kind of the upside of doing this is like just straight documenting. Like people do want to see kind of behind the scenes and like get to know who you really are. I don't know why really, but like humans, like we're so fascinated with each other and other people's stories. And that's kind of, it's almost the easier content to create is them just like documenting your life. But like I'm trying to kind of have a balance between the two. I don't really want to exclusively do one or the other. So in content creation, I kind of do, this is why I started talking about this, I kind of do try to cater to like what the stoners like, or like what's a popular thing, or what's the aesthetic that might like get more traction. So in that kind of sense, I do think more about that, but then on the documenting side, I do try to be like as authentic as possible, like not really thinking about like what people want to see. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, really interesting, I think, because it's almost the difference between putting out super curated might be the wrong word, but super targeted and maybe insincere content versus putting out like quality. Yes, this is targeted to what will perform well, but I'm not putting it out there because it is what will perform well. I'm putting it out because it's the best performing version of what I want to post, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So how much, just I guess for people who aren't familiar with you and your career and your photography, how much of your full-time career or part-time career exists on Instagram and digitally?
A very large part of it, and increasingly so. So I stopped working at Vape on the Lake last July at the Vapor Lounge, the cannabis lounge. So it's been almost a year that I've been doing full-time freelance. At the beginning of that, I was doing a lot more photography than the social media stuff. So I do like photography for some local cannabis brands. So I do product photography and also event photography. And over the last year, I've really kind of the shift towards like documenting and doing more like Instagram and like I started my website and my retail stuff. I've kind of been focusing on building out a brand and not just being focused on like being a photographer. It's an important skill and it's like part of what I do and I think it always will be. But like I kind of realized like there's like more, I think there's more of an opportunity for me to like do more than just market myself as a photographer. But it's my full time. It's my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk then a little bit about the photography side, because I see cannabis photography on the internet and that is about the extent that I know of it. Is like, wow, that's weed, and that weed looks super pretty. So tell me a little bit about what that space is like, and how it is being a cannabis photographer in a world that is very quickly turning its eyes more and more onto cannabis.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a really interesting time, and like even the fact that a cannabis photographer is like a thing is pretty cool. For myself, I really just been getting more serious about photography for about 3 years. So there's a lot of people in the industry that are like have a long-standing career in photography, and they're just getting into cannabis now. Whereas I feel like I still have a lot to learn photography-wise, but I've got the cannabis thing down. So I think it's a lot of, Instagram and social media is such a huge way of like, and so in one way, you don't really have to be a professional photographer or a professional cannabis photographer to get your cannabis photography online. If you have weed and you have a camera, you can kind of just get out there. So it's kind of an equal playing field in one sense where it's pretty open. But it's really interesting because the internet is, there's people from everywhere consuming my content, but the rules are different everywhere. So what is legal to me might not be legal to other people. Yeah, I think that there's still a lot of changes to be had for the cannabis industry. Right now in Canada, we're coming into the legal recreational market across the country like later this year. So there will be some really official, legal, on the book cannabis photography for the first time like ever, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So I think that it's super super interesting to hear you bring up the what might be legal for you might not be legal for everyone or somewhere else. Something that excuse me, have talked about a lot on this podcast, and that has really influenced not only me and my experience as a content creator, but for a lot of my friends and my followers as well, is the way that YouTube has removed a lot of cannabis-related accounts in the last couple months. I don't know how much of that you're aware of.
Yeah, I mean, almost every day on Instagram for a while, I was seeing people saying like huge accounts are getting taken down. Like Coral Reefer, she's been on YouTube for like 9 years, and all her content just got taken down. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So, what is it like working under that stress of what I'm doing is completely legal, but somewhere else it might not be legal? And what has it been like working under not only that stress and that restraint, but also seeing some of this other cannabis content face those repercussions and be removed? How has that experience been, particularly for you?
I guess this has to be prefaced with like that I am a legal patient, and it kind of gives me the confidence to just kind of do my own thing. So personally, I don't feel like I don't have like the fear, the like legitimate real life fear that a lot of people have as far as like posting content or whatever, as far as whether it's legal or illegal. But I mean, yeah, I think we have, as far as we've come, we have a long way to go, right? I think maybe like federal change in the US might have be the like one thing which actually makes like YouTube or Instagram really. But I think YouTube has just recently come out and said that they're not like as far as their community guidelines. Was it YouTube or Instagram? Yeah, it wasn't. Sorry, Instagram. Instagram's community guidelines. They used to say like the promotion and sale of drugs were like that was the official thing you couldn't do. But now apparently it's more just to do with the sales, the like direct promotion of sales. But just like promotion of
you're a medical patient that's doing this thing and you're not actually promoting drug sales, apparently they're going to like not delete your account. I don't know why YouTube. I'm curious to know what YouTube's thing is. Why they just started going so hard on all of these cannabis accounts, even like legal accounts that were just like educational got taken down. I think we just have more fighting to do, right? Like cannabis is becoming more mainstream, and there's so many changes happening all the time that it kind of is like we're making progress, but it also provokes a response from the other side when there's other people that are like staunchly against it. Those people are going to have something to say and try to like make sure like these potheads don't take over. You know, there are people that have vested interest in like not having the cannabis, like having cannabis be legal, and we still have some fighting to do for sure.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, and also super good to hear that there is still a real confidence in being able to promote what is legal where you are. Because I think that one of the biggest things that the cannabis industry as a whole, and not even just the industry, but just people who smoke regularly need as a whole, are people to advocate for the normalcy of cannabis and for people to really put out and prove that there's nothing about smoking weed that makes you lazy or a distress to society or anything like that. There are careers, there's an industry, there are functioning people and very motivated and driven people in the community, and without the confidence to post content that you've created that you feel good about and that is legal, without that confidence, it's a real detriment to, I think, the community. And so that's really uplifting and positive to hear as well.
There are so many like driven and motivated and like very productive members of society that support cannabis to varying degrees. So I think over the next 5 years or so, like that kind of image of cannabis user is going to like become more prevalent, because there are still so many people with just the old school mentality that aren't really willing to see or willing to change their perspective. But I mean, it's happening. In Canada, we're definitely seeing it. Like with legalization coming this year, there's stories about cannabis in the news, like on the main news channels, like literally almost every day. So it's coming.
Well, so to sort of wrap up here, if people are interested in finding you or learning more about you or following more of your content and your life, where are the best places for them to go to find you?
So my main thing is for sure Instagram. You can find me at Tweedledoob. I also have a website, tweedledoob.com. So I have, like I'll go to an event and take hundreds of pictures, and then I might post one or two on Instagram. So I felt like I needed a place to post more of my photos. So I have a bunch of albums on my website of different events and different places I've been. And I've also got my shop. So I don't know if you've seen my like Jolly Joint image. It's like a happy little joint. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
Yeah, I've got all the merch on there, and I'm going to be adding a bunch of new things in my shop really soon, which I'm really excited about. Some stuff, some new art that's like not Tweedledoob branded, but my friend Champ Styles is going to be making some cool, like, he's a wood burner, and he like does like wood carvings and wood burning things, and so I'm going to have some like weedy stuff of his on my site soon. And yeah, I would say those are through my website. You can also email me, tweedledoob@gmail.com. But there is a form on my site if anybody wants to reach out. I'm always happy to chat.
All right, and that is going to wrap up the interview between myself and Tweedledoob. So one more time, Tweedledoob, thank you so much for sitting down. I had an awesome time chatting with you. It was a super fun interview. I'm so sorry that the audio is a little jank at parts. I'm glad that it is as good as it is. And a big shout out to my buddy Kyle for doing a lot of work and helping clean it up as best as he could. So Thank you so much for that. And I know the audio wasn't the best, but I'm glad that it was as good as it is, and I'm glad that I could get a transcript out. So anybody that has any questions about what you heard, feel free to check out the show notes. Full transcript of the interview is posted there. Read along, listen back, whatever it is that you do. Regular content will return next week. In fact, it will be another morning's episode, and it will be me breaking a week-long tea break, so that should be really interesting. My name is Goldilocks. This is a podcast called Sesh Cast. You can check it out in all of the podcasty places, as well as on Instagram at Sesh Cast, or on the interwebs at seshcast.libsyn.com. Tweedledoob is who I interviewed today. You can check her out on Instagram at Tweedledoob, TweedleDoob, or on the interwebs at tweedledoob.com. There will be some other people linked in the show notes as well that she made reference to, so feel free to check all that out. New stuff next week. I think that's it. I think that's all of my things. All right, I'm going to go. I am recording this later. I don't have anything to smoke. Sorry. Cheers, everybody. Thanks so much for listening.